All right, so get ready, because today we are really diving deep into immigration.
Yeah, we are.
And not just, the stuff you hear on the news. We've got a whole pile of academic research you send over
Yes.
to really unpack this global story.
It's fascinating too, really, because I think most people, they hear immigration and they think, oh, it's just this enormous spike, this huge increase.
Right, like it's a new thing.
Right, it's out of control, it's this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And it's really not. I mean, globally speaking, immigration rates have been pretty stable.
Hmm. So is it more about a change in where people are going?
That's the thing. It's who's migrating, where they're headed.
Okay.
We're seeing this really noticeable shift from, like, Western countries, think Europe, North America,
Sure.
to they're seeing more and more people coming from non-Western countries.
Okay, so that's going to create some, cultural differences that maybe haven't been there as much before.
Absolutely. And it's not just, like, superficial stuff. This is about often pretty different cultures, different religions, entirely different ways of life. So it really makes you think, how do societies adapt? What does it even mean to fit in anymore?
Yeah, because if you've got a society that's been pretty much the same for a long time, and suddenly you've got this influx of people who do things differently.
Right. And it's not just the doing things differently, but the seeing the world differently, the different values.
It's got to be, it's almost like a psychological thing too, right? Like I know our sources talk about this idea of realistic threat.
Yeah. And that's a big one.
Yeah.
So you're living in a town, let's say, that's always been, pretty homogenous.
Yeah.
And suddenly there are all these new people and they need jobs, they need housing. And maybe those things are already a little tight.
Yeah.
So even if it's not a real threat, even if there are enough resources to go around, just that perception.
The perception is enough to create some anxiety.
Exactly.
It's kind of like, when a new supermarket opens and you're a little worried your favorite cashier is going to get transferred.
Right. It disrupts your sense of what's normal.
Exactly. Okay, so you've got the economic side, the jobs, the resources, but then on top of that, you've got the cultural piece.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where that idea of symbolic threat comes in.
Okay, so what is that?
So it's that feeling that your values, your traditions, your whole way of life is, like, under pressure.
Because something's changing.
Exactly. So
Indeed.
picture a small town, always been predominantly one religion, and now suddenly there's a mosque or a temple, and they're just as visible as the church.
Right.
That can be exciting, but it can also be really unsettling for folks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it really makes you think about the human side of all this, right? We're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about people
Absolutely.
trying to find their place, trying to figure out where they fit in, especially in a world that's changing so fast.
And that search for belonging, that's a powerful thing. And it leads people to some surprising places.
Yeah.
Like, one thing that really jumped out at me from the research was this trend of immigrants moving away from those big, crowded, expensive cities.
Really?
Yeah, they're heading to smaller urban areas, even rural communities.
Huh. You'd think they'd want to be where there are more people like them, more opportunities, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it's often more complicated than that. Sometimes it's not a choice. It's necessity. Maybe they can't afford to live in those big cities. Maybe there are more jobs in certain sectors in those smaller towns. Or, think about refugees
Right.
fleeing a war zone. They don't get to choose where they end up necessarily.
It's about survival.
Exactly.
But even then, I mean, you're trading one set of challenges for another, right?
Absolutely. Smaller communities often have fewer resources for newcomers. Think language classes, job training, that kind of thing.
And just less, diversity in general.
Right.
Which could make it harder to fit in.
It can be a much tighter knit social fabric, which, that can be good.
Mm.
But it also means it might be harder to break into, to really feel like you belong.
Right, because without that support, it's got to be so much harder to adjust, to learn the language, figure out the culture, all that.
It's like trying to build a house without any tools.
Mm.
You might eventually figure it out, but
But it's going to be a lot harder.
exactly. And that's why our sources really highlight how important it is to create these welcoming communities.
Okay, so what does that even mean? What makes a community truly welcoming in this context?
It's about going beyond just the basics, providing housing, language classes, those are important. But it's more than that.
It's about more than just, checking the boxes.
Exactly. It's about fostering this sense of belonging,
Mm.
making people feel like they're valued, like they're part of something.
Like they are home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the sources talked about this program in Canada where they pair new immigrant families with families who've lived there for a while,
Oh, that's neat.
just to help them navigate those first few months. Showing the ropes, answer questions. Simple, but
But brilliant. Because you're not just getting like practical help, you're getting a built-in social connection right away.
right from the start.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference. And I think it highlights something really important, which is that creating a truly inclusive society,
Mm.
it takes work.
Yeah, from both sides.
Exactly. It's not just on the immigrants to adapt.
It's about the existing communities opening up, making space,
Exactly.
and recognizing, honestly, like the richness that diversity brings.
100%. And sometimes, it's like that effort to be welcoming, to
Yeah.
create these vibrant communities,
Yeah.
it can backfire, kind of a twist.
Yeah, gentrification, right. That's something our sources really get into, like the very things that make a community attractive to newcomers.
And pushing them out.
Exactly. How does that even happen?
It's almost like too much of a good thing. Think about a neighborhood that's maybe a little rough around the edges, overlooked. Immigrants move in, they open businesses, they bring their culture, their energy.
They give it character.
Exactly. And suddenly, it's the cool new place to be.
Right. The secret's out.
And that's when the affluent residents start moving in, rents go up, property values skyrocket.
And the folks who made it cool can't afford to stay anymore.
It's a classic story, unfortunately.
Yeah, our sources brought up San Francisco's Mission District as a prime example of this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the Mission has been a hub for Latinx culture for generations. Families, businesses, that whole sense of community. But then with the tech boom,
All that wealth flooding in.
exactly. Rents have gone crazy. People are getting priced out left and right.
It's sad, really. It's like they planted the seeds, tended the garden, and just as it starts blooming.
They're told they have to move.
Exactly. It really highlights how, integration, belonging, it's not a one-time thing, is it?
Not at all. It's a constant give and take.
A negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's happening everywhere, not just San Francisco, which kind of brings us to the elephant in the room, this bigger question that's always looming.
How do nations hold on to their identity, their sense of who they are, while also integrating newcomers, especially when those newcomers are coming from very different backgrounds?
It's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think our sources, they really hit on the two big things that always come up:
Okay, lay it on me.
economics and culture.
Makes sense. So on the economic side, it's that whole question of, are immigrants helping or hurting the economy?
Right. And it's so much more complicated than people want to make it seem.
It's never just black and white.
Never. It depends on their skills, the job market, the existing social safety net, a million things.
But it's rarely just about the numbers, is it? It seems
Yeah.
like the culture clash, the values.
Oh, that's the really sensitive one. We're talking about deeply held beliefs about family, religion, how you live your life, individual freedom versus, the good of the group.
All that stuff that's hard to even talk about sometimes.
Exactly. It's like trying to mix oil and water. You can try, but
It's going to be tough.
it takes real effort on everyone's part to find that common ground. And even then, there are no guarantees.
Right, because everyone's coming from a different place with a different perspective.
Exactly. And that's where those human stories, the ones our sources share, become so powerful.
Because it reminds us that there are actual people behind all these policies and statistics.
Yes. Refugees fleeing for their lives,
Yeah.
families separated by borders, people just looking for a chance to belong.
It's about so much more than just economics or politics. It's about human beings.
It is. And I think if we can remember that, if we can approach this whole issue with a little more empathy.
It opens up the possibility for a different kind of conversation.
Exactly. One that's less about fear and more about understanding.
So it's about finding that place, right? Where everyone feels like they're valued, like they can contribute. But how do you measure that? How do you know when you've got the balance right?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And honestly, there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But our sources, they point to some interesting case studies, like Canada, for example.
They're often held up as like the multiculturalism success story.
Right, exactly. But then you've got somewhere like France, which has traditionally taken a much more assimilationist approach.
So very different models.
Very different.
Yeah.
And what works in one place might be a disaster in another, because each country is coming at this with, their own history, their own cultural baggage.
Absolutely. That's why I think it's so important to, like you said, go beyond the headlines, because there's no one-size-fits-all solution here.
Nope. It's messy. It's complicated. But I think our sources do a really good job of, laying the groundwork, giving us the tools to really understand how immigration is playing out in the 21st century.
They do. And what really struck me was how they brought it all back to the human element. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just some abstract debate.
Yeah, oh, not at all.
These are real families, real communities trying to figure out, like, where they fit in a world that's changing so
It's
fast.
about those stories, those individual journeys, people adapting, showing resilience, just trying to find a place where they belong.
Yeah, and those stories, they have the power to connect us in a way that, like, policy papers just never could.
100%. They remind us that this isn't about numbers, it's about people with hopes and dreams and fears, just like anyone else.
And if we can remember that, if we can approach these conversations with a little more empathy,
It changes everything.
it does. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you, as always, for diving deep with us. It's been uh, enlightening, to say the least. And hopefully it's given everyone listening a lot to think about.
And a lot more to learn because
Yeah.
this conversation, it's not going away anytime soon.
It's not. And it's up to all of us to keep asking those tough questions, keep listening to those different perspectives, and keep striving to build a world where everyone feels like they belong. Thanks for joining us.